I wrote a pattern where I used triangles that started at the tip or point and got bigger. And I did the pattern in 1x1 ribbing so that it would be reversible. And I needed a way to increase before I got to the part of the pattern where I could use double yarn overs to make the increase. So I needed them through here. And here is the solution I came up with. It involves Italian cast-on. If you haven't watched either of my videos about Italian cast-on, you maybe might want to go do that before we go any further so that you have some familiarity with the technique. You'll recall from Italian cast-on the end of the yarn goes away from you. It's running away from you. And when I'm doing it in one color, I'm going to fold my yarn in half, sort of as you would for long-tail cast-on. And I'm going to grip it like a bowstring. When we knit, the knit yarn is at the back, right? You take the yarn to the back to knit, and you bring the yarn to the front to purl. So I'm making knits with this strand, and I'm making purls with this strand. And here's what it looks like. So to start the tip of my triangle, I need one knit-purl pair. If I have my purl yarn on my thumb like that, can you see, if you think of my thumb as a needle and this is a stitch, can you see how if I go knitwise into the stitch, I can wrap the yarn and bring it forward, and I've made a knit stitch. There's two little legs. And then if I do the same thing back here, I think of my finger as a needle and this as a stitch. I go purlwise into the stitch, and then I wrap my purl yarn to make the stitch, and I take it back, and there's a purl stitch, and it's got a little purl collar on it. And then the last thing I do is I take my finger out of the fold, and I'm going to snug that up so that those stitches match the size of my needle. Okay, now the last thing I need to do is pinch and turn so I can work the wrong side row. And the reason I pinched is because you need for the tail end to pass right to left over the working end. You need that little cross right there so that when you work knit one, purl one, that first knit stitch is going to lock your tail in place so it can't get away. So knit one and purl one. Okay, there we are. So let's turn the work. So here is the second right side row of my pattern, and now what I need to do is I need to increase one pair at the end of this right side row. So knit one, purl one. I'm going to put my needle down, and I need to create a pair over here, and I will do that by folding my yarn. So there's my skein end running away from me. And you see this is kind of backward. When we were doing the cast on, the fold was over here on the right, and now I have the fold over on the left instead. But I'm using the same idea. That yarn in the back is for creating knit stitches, and this yarn in the front is for creating purl stitches. And so I'll do pretty much the same thing I just did. If I think of this as a stitch, the yarn in front as a stitch, I go knitwise into it. I wrap the yarn for making knit stitches, and I bring it all the way forward to make a knit stitch. And then I do the same thing in the back for the purl. I go purlwise into that yarn. I wrap the front yarn for making a purl stitch, and I drag it back where it came from to complete my purl stitch. And then I take my finger out and I will pull up on the knit stitch, especially on sort of the back side of the knit stitch, and I'm hanging on here so nobody escapes, and adjust the stitches to match the size of the needle. And you see how this stitch is basically just a yarn over hanging out there. I'm going to turn my work and let me get my needle back. And now I'm ready for my wrong side row. So knit, there we go, knit, yarn forward, and this stitch has sort of a strange stitch facing. Act like it's just a normal stitch and purl it. Don't treat it as if anything strange is going on, just pretend that there was nothing peculiar about that stitch. Okay, knit one, purl one, and I turn my work and I'm back to my right side row. So I'm going to do that one more time. So this is the third right side row of the pattern, or row 5 of the pattern. And so it's knit and purl and knit and purl and then increase. So once again I get to the end, I set my needle down, I fold my yarn, down in front, up in the middle, wrap the yarn around the needle tip and drag it forward to make a knit stitch, and then needle down and back, rotate it counterclockwise under both strands, catch the yarn in front. Some people think of it as dropping the needle tip back down in the middle, and drag it underneath, away from you and back up underneath. And there's your purl stitch. And then once again you drop what you were holding and you evaporate the excess. You end up with this strange stitch that's basically a yarn over hanging out. Hang on and turn the work. Get your needle back. And knit one. Once again, this stitch looks kind of strange. Purl it as if nothing is going on. Knit and purl and knit and purl. And we're back to the right side. Some things to think about. When I initially made this pattern, I tried using a Y increase along this edge instead. I thought that would work really well. It did not. The Y increase ended up being very tight along this edge when I stacked them up. So the Y increase didn't work for me, but you're welcome to give it a try. Maybe it will work for you. I think this method of adding a pair at the end has limited application. If you wanted to add a whole bunch of pairs out this way, the problem is your working yarn ends up over here, not out here where you would need it to be. So if you added a bunch of pairs this way, you would have to work out and back, which would add 3 rows of height to the work instead of only 2. So it might be usable, but it might not be. And that's part of why this stitch ends up with that strange stitch facing, because the yarn ends up here instead of here. So that's my sort of long way of saying you may or may not want to use this. If you don't, you may find it's just as easy to throw a couple backward loops for your increase instead, and that might be good enough. But there you are. There's the option I used. You are welcome to give it a try and see what you think. And, maybe you like it. Maybe it will spur somebody else to a new idea and a better solution. Happy knitting!